Glory to Shri Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga Hari Hari Bol. Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pishtaya Bhutare Srimate Bhaktivedanta Shami Iti Namane. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharini Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Can we just read the translation just directly for that? Do you still have that or no? Thank you, thank you. Yeah. Translation. He who brought the treasure of divine love and who was filled with compassion and mercy, where has such a personality as Srinivasa Acharya gone? Srila Prabhupada gone. Where are my Swarup Damodar and Rupa Goswami? Where is Sanatan? Where is Raghunath Das, the savior of the fallen? Where are my Raghunath Bhatta and Gopal Bhatta? Where is Krishnadas Kabiraj? Where did Lord Gauranga, the great dancer, suddenly go? I will smash my head against the rocks and enter into the fire. Where will I find Lord Gauranga, the reservoir of all transcendental qualities? Being unable to attain the association of Lord Gauranga, accompanied by all of these devotees, in whose association he did his pastimes, Narottam Das simply weeps. So I thought today we would read a little bit. There's one part of the Srimad Bhagavatam where Srila Prabhupada talks about, in the purport, about the disappearance of the spiritual master. Ordinarily, devotees don't like to talk that much about this pastime, even though they're still observed the appearance and disappearance of the Lord, and his devotees are recognized and observed. Still, generally people like to talk about it during the appearance of the Lord, but not as or the spiritual master or the great devotees, and not so much about the disappearance. Just like we read a lot about Lord Krishna's appearance, we don't read very much about Lord Krishna's disappearance, or Lord Ramchandra and Lord Ramchandra's disappearance. Even though at Lord Krishna's appearance, there was hardly anybody there. It was in the prison house, right? And among the acharyas also, at their appearance, they're not well known usually. Just like Srila Prabhupada appeared at his mother's place, the mother's family place in Calcutta. You can still visit that place. So he wasn't, at that time, there was very few people present. And at the time of his disappearance, of course, he was quite well known. Still, it's more painful, the disappearance, than the appearance. So we'll read here from Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th canto, part 4. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om
Om
Namo
Namo
Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Vasudevaya.
Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
Om
Om
Namo
Namo
Bhagavate
Bhagavate
Vasudevaya.
Vasudevaya.
This is Srimad Bhagavatam, 4th canto, 28th chapter. We'll start at text 47, and the title of the chapter is 4:28:47. Puranjana becomes a woman in the next life. This is an allegorical story told by Narad Muni to Maharaj Yudhishthir, and the prelude to this point we're at is Narada Muni talks about a king who became attached to material pleasures and sense gratification, and then in the next life he became a woman, but had the good fortune of having a husband, king, who was a devotee of the Lord. So this is an allegory. The wife is like the disciple, and the king is like the acharya. Usually in Srimad Bhagavatam, things are not allegorical, but this is one of the rare instances where it's allegorical. And so here, this is just after the king, he left his body in meditation to go back to Godhead. And so here we see, I'm not going to read the Sanskrit, just the translation and the purport. And we'll read a few verses here. This is the wife right after the passing of her husband. Being now alone and a widow in that forest, the daughter of Vidarbha began to lament, incessantly shedding tears, which soaked her breasts and crying very loudly. Purport. Figuratively, the queen is supposed to be the disciple of the king. Thus, when the mortal body of the spiritual master expires, his disciple should cry exactly as the queen cries when the king leaves his body. However, the disciple and spiritual master are never separated because the spiritual master always keeps company with the disciple as long as the disciple follows strictly the instructions of the spiritual master. This is called the association of Bani, words. Physical presence is called Vapu. As long as the spiritual master is physically present, the disciple should serve the physical body of the spiritual master. And when the spiritual master is no longer physically existing, the disciple should serve the instructions of the spiritual master. This is reminiscent of when Lord Chaitanya passed away. For many years, his Gaur Purnima birth celebration wasn't observed. But then, in a dream, Lord Chaitanya came to Narottam Das Thakur, Srinivas Acharya, and Janava Mata, and said, "Why don't you celebrate this function?" So they collaborated, and about 20 years after Lord Chaitanya's disappearance, in a place called Keturi Gram, the birth anniversary of Lord Chaitanya was celebrated. And when they celebrated, how did they celebrate it? Primarily by doing Sankirtan. So during the Sankirtan, as they were doing the Sankirtan, guess who appeared?
Yeah.
Lord Chaitanya. Not only Lord Chaitanya, Lord Nityananda, and all of his associates. They all appeared. So they became present by the devotees following the order of Lord Chaitanya. Lord Chaitanya was personally present there. So that was an interesting point. So similarly here, it says that if we follow the instructions of the Srila Prabhupada, then he is present with us. And it's not just restricted to his disciples. Anybody within this Hare Krishna movement has the opportunity to have the association of Srila Prabhupada through his Vani. Next verse. O best of kings, please get up. Just see the world surrounded by water and infested with rogues and so-called kings. This world is very much afraid, and it is your duty to protect her. Purport. Whenever the Acharya comes, following the superior orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead or his representative, he establishes the principles of religion as enunciated in Bhagavad Gita. Religion means abiding by the orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Religious principles begin from the time one surrenders to the Supreme Personality of Godhead. it is the Acharya's duty to spread a bona fide religious system and induce everyone to bow down before the Supreme Lord. One executes the religious principles by rendering devotional service, specifically the 9 items like hearing, chanting, and remembering. Unfortunately, when the Acharya disappears, rogues and non-devotees take advantage and immediately begin to introduce unauthorized principles in the name of so-called swamis, yogis, philanthropists, welfare workers, and so on. Actually, human life is meant for executing the orders of the Supreme Lord, and this is stated in Bhagavad Gita 9:34. Manmana bhavamad bhakto madhyaji mam namaskuru mami vaishasi yuktva atmanam mat parayana. Engage your mind always in thinking of me, become my devotee, offer obeisances, and worship me. Being completely absorbed in me, surely you will come to me. The main business of human society is to think of the Supreme Personality of Godhead at all times, to become his devotees, to worship the Supreme Lord and bow down before him. The Acharya, the authorized representative of the Supreme Lord, establishes these principles. But when he disappears, things once again become disordered. The perfect disciples of the Acharya try to relieve the situation by sincerely following the instructions of the spiritual master. At the present moment, practically the entire world is afraid of rogues and non-devotees. Therefore, this Krishna consciousness movement is started to save the world from irreligious principles. Everyone should cooperate with this movement in order to bring about actual peace and happiness in the world. Okay. So questions or comments here at this point? No? Nothing? Then I thought I'd read here. I don't know if you've ever seen this book. It's called When the Sun Shines. It's a description of the activities of Srila Prabhupada in Great Britain. When the Sun Shines. The title of the book is from a comment Srila Prabhupada made while he was in London, because usually in Great Britain, what kind of weather do you associate with Great Britain?
Cloudy and rainy.
No sun.
Rainy, fog, yeah, wet, like that. So Srila Prabhupada made the comment that when he was there in the summer of 1972, that when the sun shines in Great Britain, it's one of the most beautiful places on earth. So there's another allegory here, and that is that when Srila Prabhupada was there in Great Britain, it was the sun was shining. That was one of the wonderful places on earth. So this introduction.
Hare Krishna.
Yeah. Hare Krishna.
I'm sorry to interrupt. I did have a comment when you asked. You're saying that the queens were crying
Yes.
for their husband, and then they said that disciples should cry for the spiritual master.
Yeah.
And I was remembering that different associates of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, like Raghunath Das Goswami, and different, when they heard that Mahaprabhu had left, they wanted to commit suicide, and they were feeling so much separation. And then you also mentioned that sometimes the appearance is celebrated more, but not the disappearance so much. But it's also said that actually the disappearance is more, should be more celebrated, because Acharya actually is not disappearing. He's still with us, like you explained.
Yeah, I didn't explain that. You explained that, because like in the morning the sun rises, and then in the evening the sun sets, but the sun is always there in the sky. Similarly, the spiritual master is here and then disappears, But he's always present. He's present in the Goloka Vrindavan. He's present with his, as we mentioned, present with his followers, who are following his instructions. But still, the there's a different kind of mood in the different observances. Just like we just celebrated Govardhan Puja. In Govardhan Puja, there's a elaborate prasadam feasting. But but in Gaur Purnima, there's not elaborate prasadam feasting. That's saved for the next day. There's actually Ekadashi, very little. You might break a little fast if taking anything. So there's different. It's not all the same. So similarly, the observance of the disappearance of the spiritual master is for his followers. It's actually a more difficult time, although it's observed, because we recognize the spiritual master is always present. Still, there's a feeling of separation that is engendered by that time. The sun in the material world, the sun rises in the morning, and there are very few people who take time to look at it. But at sunset, a lot of people watch sunsets and they think, oh, there's a beautiful sunset, pink. But then what happens after sunset? Darkness. Darkness comes. So it's like that. Darkness comes to a certain extent after the disappearance of the spiritual master. So then I was going to read, because I'm sure most of you don't have this book. It was a little difficult to get, but I thought the introduction was quite well written, and I thought you'd appreciate it. It helps to in remembrance of Srila Prabhupada. So just like all observances and all ceremonies are meant to help us remember Krishna and his associates, so the disappearance day of the spiritual master is also for that purpose, to help us remember Krishna and his devotees. So I'll read this. Are there people who speak from beyond this world, who know the secrets of life, whose glance penetrates in a way that you can't understand, who see inside your heart, who exist within their own spiritual aura, and yet at the same time walk right beside you, sit down next to you, and enter your world, like someone who comes into your dream, who is so real that you are jolted awake and left gasping in the darkness, wondering, who was that? I found such a person. At least I think I did. I still don't know for sure if I found him or he found me. Being with him was like a flash of understanding, a shudder of intense emotion, like falling in love. For a moment, just briefly, I knew what life could really be. This story is about love. It is about the emotional connection that arose between a handful of young men and women and the one who inspired them to strive for the highest goal. Were these young men and women lost more than any others in the world are lost? More needy? Less grounded in reality? I don't think so. They were prompted to look for something different, and so they found what others did not see. The events in this book happened when I was a young man. Their memories are etched on my mind. I carry them like treasures that I can take out when I need inspiration. Bringing them into the open, I turn them to the light and then let them glint and sparkle. Sometimes when I do this, I mourn for the one I lost, a true and loving guide, and for the young man he left behind long ago. But mostly I am filled with gratitude for the things he taught me and for the memories of him that strengthened me in this world when time takes everything away. I wish I had stopped at the time to write these things down. It is a tragedy that the good things in life cannot last and that even their memory must fade. In the eternal world of the spirit, though, whatever is of value is never truly lost. So in this book, I have recovered these stories, my own and those of more than 80 friends who were there with me. Ultimately, I am mystified by as much of what happened between Prabhupada and his disciples. Who was he and how he did come to be among us? Abhay Charan De, who later became Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, was born in Calcutta on the 1st September 1896. His father, a cloth merchant whose family belonged to an aristocratic lineage, brought him up to be a devotee of Krishna. At the age of 20, Abhay enrolled in Scottish Church's College in Calcutta to study English, Sanskrit, and philosophy and economics. At the end of his 4-year course, as a protest against British rule, he refused the BA diploma offered to him. He married and began to work as a manager at a large pharmaceutical laboratory. 2 years later, in 1922, he met his guru, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, in Calcutta. At their first meeting, the teacher made a prophetic request of Abhay. Why don't you preach Sri Chaitanya's message throughout the world? Abhay was skeptical. His priority was to see India become an independent nation. I was politically minded at that time, he later said, but he recalled how Bhaktisiddhanta had refuted his arguments and convinced him to accept the task of teaching Chaitanya's message. The mission that Bhaktisiddhanta urged upon Abhay Charan had been inherited from Bhaktivinod's father, Bhaktivinoda Thakur. So to understand this inheritance and how significant it was, we must know something about Lord Chaitanya. So anyway, questions, comments on this one? I thought it was, see this book, Where the Sun Shines.
Prabhu, I missed it. Who wrote that book?
Ranchor. There's a devotee named Ranchor.
Rancho. Okay.
It's a little difficult to get. It was printed in small quantities and it's mostly in London. Just like we read we studied the book, The Great Transcendental Adventure by Kurma. So that describes all the activities that Srila Prabhupada did in Australia and New Zealand. So this describes the details of his activities in London, which we see a little bit in the Miracle on Second Avenue, but this is more detailed. And why is this important? Well, remembering the activities and understanding and studying the activities of Srila Prabhupada, because it's very difficult to understand the proper understanding and application of religion. Yamaraj asked Yudhishthira, how can you understand the principles of religion? This is in, the Yaksha Prashna. So Yudhishthira Maharaj said, it's very difficult. Every rishi, every muni has a different understanding of what religion is. But the best way to understand it is the principles of religion are hidden within the hearts of the great souls, Mahatmas, Mahajans. So the best way to understand religion is to study and follow in their footsteps. So in order to follow in their footsteps, we take their instruction and we study what they did at what times and what places. Lord Chaitanya was 500 years ago, and Srila Prabhupada was just a few decades ago. So his application of the principles of religion are so much relevant to our understanding of how to be Krishna conscious in the so-called modern world. So it behooves everybody in the Krishna consciousness movement to study those, to try to understand those activities and teachings, and to develop an appreciation of Srila Prabhupada being the founder Acharya. We'll hear about that. We'll hear about that this evening. Oh, one interesting thing I found when we were doing the research for the etiquette manual is that a couple of, not this past Vyasa Puja, but the previous Vyasa Puja, we produced a magazine with homages to Srila Prabhupada from devotees in Philadelphia. I don't know if some of you saw that, and it was a small magazine, little attempt. We didn't get a lot of participation in there. So I was reading over some of the GBC resolutions about deity worship, and I came across one that said that it was resolved that all ISKCON devotees are recommended, not required, but recommended to write an homage for Srila Prabhupada's Vyasa Puja yearly. Did you know that? I didn't know. So now we know. So it's recommended. That's one part of our sadhana. Sadhana means our regular. And when you write, when you write, you're forced to sit down. You're forced to think about what you're writing, the subject you're writing about, and it's a purificatory process because we don't always think in detail about some things that we should. So I'm going to read one more thing. This book, which I don't know if some of you know, this is a book that was published by BBT shortly after Srila Prabhupada's disappearance. It contains 5 essays on separation from Srila Prabhupada by Satsarup Das Goswami. It's very, very good. So I'll pick one at random. It's very good. Okay. This is number 3. We have all been very fortunate after millions and millions of lifetimes in this material world to get the association of a great sadhu in Mahabhagavata, Srila Prabhupada. We are very fortunate persons. Now Srila Prabhupada has departed from this material world, but that does not mean that our attachment has departed. Ordinarily, when a man dies, his wife observes a little mourning and then looks for another husband for sense gratification. In fact, society encourages this. But in our case, it is not that the spiritual master dies, or that our relationship with him dies, or that our attachment to him dies. And it is not that because the disciple is still alive, he has to become attached to another guru. Rather, the one guru who gave us Krishna consciousness is still with us. On the title page of his Srimad Bhagavatam, Srila Prabhupada has written, "Dedicated to my spiritual master, His Divine Grace, Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Goswami Maharaj, he lives forever by his divine instructions, and the follower lives with him." So that's what we have been discussing, how to become more attached to Prabhupada. Understanding his disappearance is a way for us to increase our attachment. Now, after his recent departure, we are taking to various ways of remembering Srila Prabhupada. Devotees are worshiping a murti of Srila Prabhupada. During Prabhupada's presence, there were no murtis of Srila Prabhupada, in case you didn't know. Hearing his tapes more often and more carefully, trying to surround ourselves with all semblances of his personal presence, and trying to understand that his instructions must be followed very carefully. Any way you can, increase your attachment for Srila Prabhupada. This is our motive in reading relevant verses in these classes and trying to understand Srila Prabhupada's disappearance according to the scriptures. In India, Achyutananda Maharaj quoted some lines from a Vaishnava scripture. One great Vaishnava wrote, "My spiritual master has just left this world, Now, when I visit Radha Kund, it appears to me like the gaping jaws of some monster. And when I see Govardhan Hill, it appears to be rearing before me like a python. So if the spiritual master is not here, what's left? We understand that our spiritual master is present, yet we are feeling separation. Here's another reference. I would like to read what will help us in understanding spiritual separation. In Prema Vilas, there are two kinds of emotional activities, separation and meeting. That transcendental separation is so acute that it is actually more ecstatic than meeting. So it's not like material separation. I remember an autobiography that Eleanor Roosevelt wrote about her husband who passed away. The title expressed her feelings. My life is empty now and I am lost, passing a few more years. The real person in my life is gone. But we are not resigned like that. We have to increase the intensity of our attachment to our spiritual master. And if you are thinking, all this intensity has nothing to do with me, I never had much of an attachment to Srila Prabhupada. Well, now it's the time to begin. We've been discussing the position of the devotee in separation, and you can cultivate this. In the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Adi Lila, chapter 1, there are very authoritative, definitive descriptions of the spiritual master. In one purport, Prabhupada writes, the service to the spiritual master is essential. If there is no chance to serve the spiritual master directly, a devotee should serve him by remembering his instructions. There is no difference between the spiritual master's instructions and the spiritual master himself. In his absence, therefore, his words of direction should be the pride of the disciple. If one thinks that he is above consulting anyone else, including his spiritual master, he is at once an offender at the lotus feet of the Lord. As one Vaishnav poet says, your mercy is all that I am made of. The devotee's whole state of being is, I've got my orders from my spiritual master and I am fixed in that service. In the concluding words of the Chaitanya Charitamrita, Prabhupada speaks about his relationship with his spiritual master, Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, in separation. These references help us to understand our connection with our spiritual master, who has now left this material world. We know that Krishna also left the material world 5,000 years ago, although he's actually in the heart of every living being. And similarly, the spiritual master is in the heart of the devotee, just as much as the Lord is there, though not in exactly the same way. Of course, we don't fully understand how the Lord is there, but at least we've heard enough from the scriptures that we can begin to understand and accept it. And the same thing applies to our relationship with our spiritual master. If we serve with love, then Krishna and the spiritual master will give us intelligence to understand these things. In his concluding words of Chaitanya Charitamrita, Srila Prabhupada writes, I still consider his divine grace to be always present with me by his Vani, his words. There are two ways of association, by Vani and by Vapu. Vani means words and Vapu means physical presence. Physical presence is sometimes appreciable and sometimes not, but Vani continues to exist eternally. Therefore, we must take advantage of the Vani, not the physical presence. Bhagavad Gita, for example, is the Vani of Lord Krishna. Although Krishna was personally present 5,000 years ago and is no longer physically present from the materialistic point of view, Bhagavad Gita continues. Then, Srila Prabhupada tells the wonderful story of how he and his spiritual master met and how he gradually formed his life in service to his spiritual master by starting back to Godhead, writing Srimad Bhagavatam, and finally coming to America. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. Can I ask one more question, please?
Of course.
Okay, do you know if there was a daily Guru Puja for Srila Prabhupada when he was still on the planet? is a with a picture. I know he was not in the same place every day, everywhere. So, do you know anything about that?
Yes, of course there was. Yes, in every temple there was a daily Guru Puja with the Prabhupada's picture at the time. Yeah, on the Vyasasan.
Okay.
Was that surprising?
No, no, no. I knew because you said there was no murti. Yeah, and then I was thinking, then I remembered, oh, I wonder if they had the daily Guru Puja. I just
Yeah, yeah,
curious.
yeah. Yeah. So those pictures that were on the Vyasasan are still around. The first one in New York, where when I joined, is in Tawako right now. But then we keep it very nicely. We should bring it to Philly. Any other questions or comments?
Prabhuji, small question for clarification, Prabhuji.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
Srila Prabhupada disappeared on 14th November 77, right? 1970,
Yes,
14th November. So
yes.
we are following, I mean, it's like 2020, this today is 18th November. So this we are following that Gaura Chaturthi, keeping that in mind, like this is our Gaudiya Vaishnava calculation or Hindi calculation, or what, how it is calculated, 18th November.
Yeah. So there's the Vedic calendar is you can go to the GBC Vaishnav calendar. It's according to the Vedic month and the Vedic Tithi. So it's so Govardhan Puja, which was Sunday, was the Pratipat. Diwali is Amavasya.
Yeah.
So then Pratipat, then Dvitiya, Tritiya, Chaturthi is today. So it's according to, and the Vedic calendar is lunar. So every so many years, like this year, there was Purushottam Mas, because 360 days, 300 the days in the Vedic in the lunar calendar don't exactly jive with the solar calendar. So every 2 or 3 years, it has to be adjusted, and they add an extra month there.
Yeah.
So yeah, the following. It was the Chaturthi of this month that's called the Amavasya. Then it's a Gora Pakshe. Gora Pakshe means the waxing moon.
That's in white.
2 weeks waxing, 2 weeks waning. So this is the waxing moon of this month. Gora Pakshe, fourth day is when Prabhupada left. Yeah.
Haribol, I
Yeah.
want to share something that I read this morning. Our Prabhupada disappearance day from Prabhupada in letters is in December 13, 1973 in Los Angeles. Prabhupada said, and spiritually there's no difference between appearance and disappearance. So although there is disappearance day of Om Srimad Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur, there's nothing to be lamented. Although we feel separation, that feeling is there. But spiritually, there's no difference between appearance and disappearance. That our lamentation, that Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati brought this message to distribute all over the world. So Prabhupada is telling so. And
Thank
also
you.
Prabhupada said, we have nothing to lament for disappearance. We should simply remember his activities that is required.
I hear what you're saying. Of course,
Yes.
feeling of separation feels like lamentation for me. And anyway, the mood in appearance and disappearance, on one side, on one sense, there's no difference, but there is a different mood in the separation and disappearance. And
Yeah, that's Srila Prabhupada says that.
I know.
Yeah.
I know. But he also said what I read from from Srimad Bhagavatam. When the Acharya leaves, the disciple is supposed to cry.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Srila Prabhupada say I say you cannot understand the activities of the Vaishnava. They come, any Vaishnava come for some particular mission. You know?
Okay. Thank you very much. I have to go. But
Thank you, Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
That's a very sweet and heartfelt class. Thank you for sharing that with us. today. There is a program in honor of Srila Prabhupada observing his disappearance day, starting at 10 o'clock to 12:30 at the temple. It'll be broadcast on YouTube, the Philadelphia YouTube channel, for those of you that can't make it. And then this evening, we also have a very special presentation by His Grace Sureshwar Prabhu on Srila Prabhupada. It's very important for the devotees to, I think very important to hear for the devotees to hear this presentation. 6:30, it's on the same Zoom channel here. For those that are enrolled in the Vaishnava etiquette class, this is also part of the Vaishnava etiquette class as well. Okay, so see you either at the temple or online. Srila Prabhupada ki.
Yeah.
Jai. Thank you very much, Prabhu.